All right, welcome everyone. We are excited to offer our quarterly webinar. This time we're talking about aquaculture in America, a big topic obviously for SAA, and most importantly, the NOAA strategic plan. So what the plan is and what's next. So I'll introduce our speaker here in just a moment. Quickly for a few housekeeping items. Just so you know, all participants are muted. We are recording this webinar, so if you're coming in late or you missed it by accident, this will be posted on the SAA website. If you have questions, which we encourage you to make this a discussion, there's a Q&A function on the Zoom control panel, so please submit questions, ask often and frequently, and we'll make sure to filter those over to Danielle, our speaker today. And then, as always, we just want to review kind of for those of you new to SAA as an organization, just a quick update on who we are. SAA is an organization of soybean farmers and the soybean industry dedicated to promoting U.S. aquaculture, so trying to grow domestic production, because we really see that as a great partner to soybean farmers, with soy as a core protein for aquafeed. In doing that, we also do a lot of research. So we create aquafeed solutions with U.S. soy. So you'll notice on one of the updates at the end of our session here today, we have a number of research projects going on and an annual RFP. I'll have an update on that at the end as well. But we're trying to solve the problems that the aquaculture industry is facing and create value with soy. I mentioned that already. So how we accomplish that mission is through these 5 core program areas. Research, this is the about 56% of our budget on an annual basis. So a lot of resources, again, farmer funding going into aquafeed solutions using U.S. soy. We also do market development in the U.S. So investing in new technologies and new partnerships to help grow aquaculture. So very fitting for our conversation today. I have partnerships with the aquaculture industry, farmers, academia, and feed suppliers that we work closely with to make sure that we understand the direct needs of those stakeholders, and everything that we're investing in has a home ultimately when it's completed. Do a lot of education, so welcome to the SAA webinar series. That's what we're here doing today. We also have a fish feed newsletter that goes out every month with articles and information about the organization and updates on the research that we're conducting. And then lastly is policy. So the smallest part of our budget, we are a checkoff organization, so funded by farmers, which means we have limited use of what we can do in the policy space. However, we know it's important. We recognize it's one of the largest barriers to aquaculture growth, and so we want to make sure we support that as best we can. I'd be remiss if I didn't thank our farmers. So on the screen is the members of SAA. So these are all qualified state soybean boards representing the soybean farmers in each one of their states. So thank you to Illinois, Iowa, Kansas, Kentucky, Michigan, Missouri, Nebraska, Ohio, South Dakota, Tennessee, and Virginia for making this and all of SAA possible. Truly, this is soybean farmers funding this, our organization, and all of the outcomes and initiatives that we're working on. We also work closely with our national soybean affiliates, that'd be WISH, the World Initiative for Soy and Human Health, USEC, U.S. Soybean Export Council, USB, the United Soybean Board, and ASA, the American Soybean Association. So I'm sure you've seen a lot of those in either other work or out in the aquaculture space. Just know we work closely as we can with them. And usually if you're going to have an aquaculture topic, it's going to go from them to us or from us with them. And so we're trying to stay on the same page there and get better at serving you as an aquaculture industry. So with that, I want to thank all of you for attending. We have about 50 attendees online right now. Had 132 register, the majority in the aquaculture space. So that's wonderful. Again, they'll all get this webinar after it's recorded in the follow-up email. So if you're hearing, after this date, thank you for registering. 132 is one of our largest audiences. So these keep growing and certainly open to topics and speakers and needs for future webinars. So my contact information will be provided at the end. Please don't be bashful in raising your hand to speak and or offering a topic that might be beneficial to all of our audiences here. So with that, I'd like to welcome my new friend. I'll say we've had a number of discussions, and it's exciting to start to align the soybean industry with what's going on at the federal level. So with that, we have Danielle Blacklock, the Director of of the Office of Aquaculture at NOAA. And Danielle, if you don't mind, just introducing yourself and your experience and giving our audience a bit of background on your role at NOAA.
Sure. Thank you for having me today. Thank you very much, Easton, for the invitation, and I'm excited to have a conversation with you all. I'm Danielle Blacklock, as Easton said, and I'm the director of the Office of Aquaculture with inside of NOAA and the Fisheries Service. I have a background in marine science and social science to some degree in that I studied farmers. So in graduate school, I studied aquaculturists. I did a national survey to better understand how farmers, especially shellfish farmers, perceived risk and how that perception of risk factored into business decisions. That was about 20 years ago now. And I have to say that there's been a lot of advancements in some of the risk mitigation schemes coming from USDA, especially over the last 5 years, which is lovely to see. In my career at NOAA, I've been in the agency for about 15 years, doing everything from wild harvest fisheries to coming back to my roots in aquaculture. And I've been the director of the office for about 5 years. My first 4 years. My first day on the job was the first day we all went remote because of a pandemic. So you can imagine it's been a wild ride. Would you like me to share my slides? Does that make sense?
Yes. First, let me first thank you and maybe set the stage for our audience. So a little context. Many of you, I'm sure, have seen the NOAA Aquaculture Strategic Plan for 23 through 28 published. And I know there's a number of other program reviews that have been happening in the past year about the plan to help it start to take shape. And so that's what led me to reaching out to you, Danielle. I think that as you review the plan, I have mine printed out in beautiful black and white here and marked up and highlighted right next to my Bible, basically. So it's an important plan, and I felt it important to understand that from the soybean family side and how we fit in. So that's the genesis of why we're meeting here today and what we hope to talk about. And to set the stage, Danielle's going to share the national need for aquaculture. So what's driving NOAA to create this plan and what they're working on, learn about NOAA as an organization itself, review the plan itself, and then talk about what Soy can do to help. So through all of that, I, again, strongly encourage you to write questions. If we get a break, we'll try to answer those and then have a discussion with this group as we go along. So with that, yes, Danielle, let's turn it over to the real expert, and I'll have you share your screen and we'll jump right in.
All right, and you are not alone. I also, it's not going to show up. I also have a black and white printout of our strategic plan that sits on my desk as well.
Perfect.
So thank you again for having me, and I'll dive right in. All right, so let's start with why we're even talking about aquaculture. We need more seafood in the United States. And it'd be nice if we grew it ourselves. We import more than 70% of the seafood we eat, although we have a report that will be rolling out soon that puts it at a much higher percentage than that. You heard it here first. We know that we import most of our seafood. And that's with us only eating 70% of the recommended amount of seafood for that rich omega-3 fatty acids. You all know all of this. With that import, it means we have to pay attention what's happening globally. And global demand is increasing. So not only is our demand increasing, we used to only eat 50% of what we should eat. Now we're up to 70. But that import, that's driving that import number higher. At the same time, global demand is growing. We know that we're going to have a global seafood supply gap, meaning there's going to be not enough seafood to meet demand in the next 25 years. And that's sort of the supply demand economic side of it, but there's also the nutrition side. I mentioned the omega-3 fatty acids and all of the studies that have come through and the importance of that, you know, the 37% risk reduction in heart disease, and that it is now a diet rich in omega-3 fatty acids is first line of treatment for traumatic brain injury. Literally, they say, go home and eat seafood. That the sort of implications of nutrition of eating a diet rich in omega-3 fatty acids is huge. And so I put on sort of some of the malnutrition statistics in the US. We have an obesity problem in the US. We know that diet rich in omega-3 fatty acids is a lean protein that helps folks eat a heart healthy diet. And it also would help if we can grow more of this seafood at home to decrease that percentage of households that are food insecure. If your neighbor is growing the food, you are more likely to be able to access it. So I mentioned that we're watching globally because we're in a global marketplace. And one of the big things that has happened just in July, so just over a month ago, is for the first time ever, as a government, intergovernmental, we have global guidelines for sustainable aquaculture. There are, of course, different badging programs and certification programs that have been around for a long time, but this is the first sort of government-led process that has guidance on what do we mean by sustainability and what are the bars that we'd like people to meet. These guidelines are voluntary and they're to be implemented by governments and the aquaculture community. There are 10 guidelines pertaining to feed. It is a comprehensive document. Here are a couple that I think that you should be aware of. One is support the gradual reduction and improve efficiency of wild fish stocks as feed. Great. That means we need to shift gears. We've already been doing that for a long time, and I know that you have been a part of that. But here it's calling out the standard of this is what we need to do across the world, not just in the US. Support investment in research and innovation to identify these alternative ingredients, notably from local source resources. Again, we're feeding the globe with some of the feeds that you prepare, and that is fantastic. We need to get there to get away from the wild fish stocks, but let's also recognize that they can be a local feed supply for here in the US and promote feeding strategies and feed management practices for everything from digestibility, FCR, all of that you all are already researching and working on. Now, zooming into the nation, I'm going to run through 4 plans really quickly, and then I'll get into what NOAA is doing about it. These are 4. This is 3, and I have 1 on the next slide. Plans that have come out in the past couple of years. 1, the Ocean Climate Action Plan. This is a White House level plan that asks us to expand and decarbonize sustainable US aquaculture production. I just got an email yesterday that said, please tell me how you have done this. So we are held accountable for meeting what is in these plans. Then if national security memoranda is not part of your vernacular, this is NSM 16, and it says aquaculture is agriculture, and agriculture is critical infrastructure of this nation. So it is saying both farmers in the water and on terrestrial land are critical infrastructure. And I think that that's a pretty powerful statement when it comes to national security. And over on the right, threats to food and agricultural resources. It's a little bit of an eerie cover, but it has some great statements inside the document. The Department of Homeland Security recommends the growth of domestic aquaculture as one of 6 national priorities. For aquaculture to make it to the top 6 priorities coming from the Department of Homeland Security, that's a big deal. And then finally, this just rolled out in June during Ocean Week, the National Strategy for a Sustainable Ocean Economy. Of course, seafood is a big part of that. And again, it calls seafood into this national and nutritional security conversation as a critical element of global food and nutrition security. And it goes further to say that we will beat that drum internationally, and at international fora, we will elevate seafood. And I have honestly seen that quite a bit since this came out already. I used to talk about how my inbox has changed to have a lot more .mil and .dhs emails, and that remains true. But now I have a lot more at statedepartment.gov. We're doing an international this or that on food security, and we want aquaculture to be a part of it. All right, so this is where all of the aquaculture expertise in the country comes together. Under the National Science and Technology Council, which is part of the Office of Science and Technology Policy, we have a subcommittee on aquaculture. What it means is all the way up to the White House level, there are high-level officials from every agency that touch aquaculture that come together on a regular basis to talk about aquaculture, advancing it in the nation, and implementing all of those strategies that I just mentioned. To do that, we have developed a national aquaculture development plan. It is in draft. It is going to come out in final any day. I'm just waiting for the email. It is so close. This is the first national aquaculture development plan that we have had since 1983. Which is its own excitement and challenge. And we're really excited about the sort of three legs of the stool that this plan is built on. Research, always research, figuring out what's next, how to advance that innovation and technology. How do we do that in a coordinated way across the federal government, not duplicating, being efficient with taxpayer dollars. The second piece of the plan is regulatory efficiency. And then the third piece is new. It's economic development for aquaculture. This brought in people that are not aquaculture experts, but people that are economic development experts, and asked them to join us in this aquaculture conversation. And it's really exciting. And now when this plan comes out in final, it went out in draft for public comment, you'll see that there are actions for these economic development agencies to execute to help advance aquaculture development. All right, now I'm zooming into NOAA, and I'm going to speed up a little bit just so we have lots of time for conversation. In NOAA, we're the ocean agency. We're also the weather agency, but I sit on what we call the wet side. And in terms of aquaculture, all of our focus is on marine aquaculture. Everything I have said up until now was about all aquaculture. Now I'm going to start talking about marine because that's what I do and where my focus is, and our whole program. We have 3 different line offices, 3 different parts of NOAA that cover aquaculture in different ways. One, the fishery service, that's where my office sits. We have regional aquaculture coordinators in each of our regions around the country. We do in-house research. This is where our sort of federal researchers sit, or in the fishery service. We also have some federal researchers that sit in the National Ocean Service. This is where they do all of the marine spatial analysis to help us find good spots for aquaculture to grow in the marine environment. And then the third arm is our Sea Grant College program. Similar to land grant programs, they are partnered with universities, and they do everything from extension to run grant programs for external and academic research. This whole group came together, has worked together and functioned as one office for a long time. In my staff meetings, I have members of the entire program. So we function as one team, but the first time we came together in writing was in this 2023 NOAA Aquaculture Strategic Plan, which is down on the bottom right. Within the fishery service, that is nested under our national seafood strategy, which is up on the left, which also calls for an increase of domestic aquaculture production. This strategic plan down on the bottom right is how we organize and focus our efforts. With limited resources, these are our 4 goals. This is where we put our money. And other agencies can make up the balance of other pieces of the puzzle that are needed, but this is where we have unique expertise to move the needle. One is to manage sustainably and efficiently. 2, lead science for sustainability. 3, educate and exchange information. And 4, support economic viability and growth. I'm going to give you one example of a project that we have under each of these goals so you can see the kinds of work that we do here. So under manage sustainably and efficiently, we are identifying aquaculture opportunity areas. What does that mean? It means we're looking in the marine environment in our national waters for areas that are appropriate for aquaculture development. To be appropriate, it means a couple of things. First, it has to be appropriate ecologically. So in enough depth of water for flushing. It can't be in areas where there are endangered species. We're looking for important habitats for wild fish, things like that. The areas also have to be appropriate socially. So that means that they're out of shipping lanes and not in traditional fishing grounds. Our coastal ocean is a busy place. So trying to make sure that we're not in areas that are a hubbub of activity is one of the goals. And then the third way that they have to be appropriate is economically. So they can't be too far from shore. Maybe someday they can be like way out over the horizon, but right now, for a project to be economically viable, they have to be close enough to shore, close enough to a port for that opportunity to truly grow. We started this effort looking in the Gulf of Mexico and in Southern California. And we are looking there for areas that are in federal waters and areas that can hold 3 to 5 farms approximately, so between 500 and 2,000 acres. So those are sort of the bounds that we looked at. It is a 2-phase process. The first phase is developing an atlas. I talked about that team that does marine spatial analysis. We have 30 researchers that scrub data to build GIS layers to build these atlases. And they are legitimately like 600-page documents. They shipped me printed copies, and it felt like I was like back in 1983 with like a map in my car, with like map on map on map. And it all results in one map that shows you areas that are most appropriate for 3 to 5 farms to be placed based on their spatial analyses, both for the Gulf and for Southern California. The second phase then takes those options, we call those spaces that the atlas identifies options, takes those options and does a deep dive analysis on them, using our best available science to better understand what are the environmental impacts, potential genetic impacts, social impacts, all of that. We do that through the NEPA process. It's the National Environmental Policy Act process, through the development of a draft programmatic environmental impact statement. It's a really long document that does a deep dive on all of these areas. I just talked about the first 2 areas that we are doing. So we're looking in the Gulf of Mexico and Southern California. I anticipate that those draft programmatic EISs, those deep dives, are going to come out in draft this fall. That means for the first time, people are going to see the analysis of where we think in the Gulf of Mexico and Southern California aquaculture is most appropriate to grow. It doesn't mean that farms have to go in those areas, and it is not pre-permitting. It's a planning process. It's all of this work that has been done to do this analysis can be fed into a permitting process for an applicant, but it doesn't mean that folks have to go there. Those are happening in federal waters. In Alaska, we announced last spring of 23, that we are in partnership with the state looking in state waters. This may be of less interest to this particular association because it is for unfed aquaculture. We are only looking at invertebrates, filter feeders, and seaweed.
Danielle, on that.
Yeah.
So just a quick question. So where NOAA's stopping is literally in the map of like, this is where we see the best opportunity, but you mentioned it's not a pre-permitting process. So I'm assuming that's kind of where it ends, right? You're going to put the map out and let private interests take over, or do you have like a handoff or an incentive program to actually get the farms in those waters?
So the map is the first phase. That deep dive is sort of the incentive program,
Okay.
because all of that analysis that is being done would have to be paid out of pocket by an
Right.
interested applicant who is trying to not be trying to put a farm that is not in an AOA. Again, it's totally possible, and there are absolutely areas that are appropriate for aquaculture to grow that are not in these AOAs. We gave the aquaculture opportunity areas parameters of looking for space big enough for 3 to 5 farms. So there might be individual farm locations that are equal or maybe even better suited than what we were looking for. But now they have all of this analysis that has been done proactively that they won't have to pay for or spend the time doing.
Yep.
So that's sort of the incentive.
Very helpful. And then the other question, which is while we're on that topic. So in the Gulf of Mexico in particular, SAA is working on a social license project. So we've had a project going in now for 2 years on a community advisory panels, essentially a model for engaging the community. And you may or may not be aware of that. So it's welcome to the party. But I think it's for those viewing this webinar, it's a project where SAA is trying to complement work that's already happening. We may or may not have realized that until right now, but we have a guidebook essentially on how to, if the permitting's easier because the surveys and all that work has been done. This is one of those other key steps that I'm assuming NOAA is not going to participate in, but can maybe support. But earning the social license to actually get the operation going is another key function. So letting you know that that's available.
That's great. I would love to learn more about that. Great. All right. Our next goal is leading science for sustainability. And I am not going to dive into all of these, but I wanted to sort of show you where our research assets are and the types of work we do. We do everything from candidate species development to disease mitigation, vaccine development, interactions with the marine environment to better understand our aquaculture structures providing habitat or damaging habitat, and then taking that information. And where we are now is that we've developed a calculator specific to oyster gear at the moment, but it shows that you can go from research to actual tools. And that's where we think our sweet spot is the development of tools to either inform a farmer or to inform a decision maker. Goal 3 is educate and exchange information. So we have the largest communications team in the fisheries service. It is almost a team of 3. I'm finalizing hiring, but that is big for a federal government communications team. And we try to do a couple of different things. One is show what farmers are doing, who they are, and what farms look like. We all grow up in the US kind of picturing the red barn and knowing what a farm looks like, but no one knows what an aquaculture farm looks like. So we try to showcase the face of farmers, looks just like your neighbor, not some dark shadow in the corner. And here's what aquaculture in the US looks like. So we do that in a number of different ways, including a Tide to Table series. We have a lot of videos. The Fisheries Service has a professional video team that we take advantage of and send around the country to create aquaculture videos. And then, of course, we're always trying to find opportunity, like the picture down on the right, in partnerships with media. We do a lot of engagement with media, myth busting, fact checking, all of that. But also there's opportunities that come up, like the Today Show being interested in featuring aquaculture as the climate solution during, that was Earth Week last year. The short on aquaculture was on right after Reba McEntire. So, and our fourth goal is supporting economic viability and growth. Most of this effort is done by Sea Grant. They have great workforce development programs and grants. I run a small diversity, equity, and inclusion grant that brings either diverse communities to see aquaculture or aquaculture into diverse communities. That those are sort of the two sides of the same coin, and it's super exciting to have things like growing fish or algae in your classroom brought into schools in America and things like that. And of course, we support the National Science and Technology Council, that economic development plan. My deputy is actually the chair of that. So we support that effort wholeheartedly. And that is what I have for you. I wanted to leave plenty of time to have a conversation. I have some backup slides with where the AOA options are and that kind of stuff if anybody wants to dive into that. But I think I'll stop there and see if folks want to start chit-chatting.
Well, while our thoughtful audience here is coming up with questions and curiosities, I have a few. So this may be a phase or in the coming plan. Hopefully that email is like today or tomorrow. Please forward it on to me when you get it. But I was curious, like what kind of grants are available for operations to start up, because I know resources and all it's a very heavy lift to get a farm started. Is there a resource, a list of grants available, and do you see that expanding with the exciting plans coming out here in the next quarter?
Yes. I don't know how to drop some. Oh, here's a chat. If I drop it in the chat, will people be able to grab it?
We'll grab it and send it out afterwards, or you can share your screen too if
okay.
Looks like fisheries.noaa.
Yes, I just dropped, and you can Google aquaculture grant guide. Coming out of Executive Order 13921, which was the executive order on seafood competitiveness that called for the development of aquaculture opportunity areas and a number of other things. It put NOAA as the lead agency for NEPA. And it also asked us to work across the federal government and outline all of the federal aquaculture grant and assistance programs that are available or available to aquaculture. They don't necessarily have to be aquaculture specific. So that was published in 2021. It's probably time for us to do it again. And we've been talking about that because some things have changed. As I sort of insinuated at the opening, USDA has developed a number of new programs that aren't necessarily to get a farm going, but to protect a farm once it's going. Some of their risk mitigation programs and insurance programs, disaster programs that are now available. That guide, however, will show all of the sort of grants that are available to get farms going. That it will not, I'm making it sound wonderful, and there are a lot of great grant programs. There isn't anything specifically to start a farm. And I know that that is a gap. Mm-hmm. We are in constant conversations with the investment community. And what I'm coming to realize a little bit more over time is that aquaculture and impact investment have been a match made out of necessity and not a match made in heaven. Mm. Because the ROI on food production is not what venture capital is looking for. They're looking for ROI that might be the next smart net that can be on a bunch of farms, but not to actually start a farm. So now we're starting to rethink how financing for aquaculture might look and what federal programs might be able to help unlock that. And that's sort of, we're just starting to machinate through how do we make some of our existing loan programs maybe more accessible and things like that. But I don't have any great tales. That guide does have a lot on research grants and things like that. But if folks are trying to start a farm, it might not meet the bill.
Yep. Makes sense, and I think it's something all of agriculture experiences, right? Significant startup capital, not
Mhm.
necessarily short-term payouts as the investing community would like to see, but still important. Yeah. So anyway, I was just curious on what those opportunities look like and if there were any, maybe not grants, but like you mentioned loans at the end of that, revolving loan funds, those kinds of things to help get this off the ground, because I just know that it's a barrier, right? The other barrier is just the startup costs associated with permitting and the survey work and all of those. I'm not an expert in that space, so I'm going to stop right there. But I know that both time to return and the cost to get that licensing completed is a barrier. So
Mhm.
I think I'm quite certain it's in the plan, right? Create a more streamlined process for permitting. So can you speak to that in a little bit more like at a technical level of what that looks like, where it is today, and kind of how this plan should improve that over the next 5 years?
Yes. So some of that is like through the aquaculture opportunity area effort. That is creating regulatory efficiency by doing so much of it upfront that an individual applicant won't need to have quite as much of a regulatory burden to go out and do all of the um, analysis to find the space and evaluate it, and everything that is happening for AOAs will feed into the permitting process in a way that we are hopeful. I mean, part of the purpose is to make it much more efficient on the back end. We won't know until someone does it, until we identify an AOA and somebody puts in an application and we say, "Oh, this worked," or "Oh, this didn't hit the mark." Um, so that is one way. We also, the Army Corps of Engineers over the past few years has developed a number of nationwide permits for aquaculture. Those were also called for, or evaluating whether they would be useful was called for in that same executive order. Um, so that can help with moving things through the Army Corps process to some degree. We also have a history of developing programmatic consultations. So any federal action requires a consultation for Endangered Species Act and a number of other acts um, to identify whether that action, which for aquaculture it's the giving of a permit, is the federal action, whether that action will cause any harm to endangered species. We have looked at that programmatically in a couple of ways, or we also have the same authority, not under Endangered Species Act, but under a different law for essential fish habitat. Will it cause any harm to essential fish habitat? We can look at that holistically. For a type of aquaculture in a general region, we can do all of that proactively, and we have done that in a number of areas, and we are interested in seeing if expanding that. It's called a programmatic approach because you're looking program wide then rather than application by application, um, can be helpful. It's certainly in the areas where we have done it, it certainly is quite helpful, but we also don't want to go through all of the um, effort of putting one together if no one then uses it, because we could have redirected that federal support in another direction. So those are some of the things that we are looking at doing or currently doing or have done. We also have set up in each region of the country coordinating groups across the federal family. So 10 years ago, the people that were in charge of the Clean Water Act permits didn't know the people who were in charge of the Section 10 Rivers and Harbors Act permit. So the EPA people didn't know the Army Corps people, didn't know the NOAA people, didn't know the Coast Guard, and didn't know how to make sure that the Department of Defense didn't need that space. And we've built all of that infrastructure behind the scenes. So these are things that totally change the game in terms of efficiency, but aren't really visible until you go through it. And now Sally knows Bob, and we know the steps, and we've mapped all of that. And if we get a permit, this is the baton handoff, and that is known not just at the national level, but in each region. So we're ready.
It's great progress. So switching, sharing one of my other questions. So I know you're not the point person for inland aquaculture, but it certainly has a role to play, and both for inland aquaculture as its own, but also in supporting offshore aquaculture. So, to the best of your ability, can you either speak to how the plan works and how NOAA works with farming on land, and or maybe a resource of where to go next for, since we're not diving into that as much as we should today.
Mm-hmm. So on the policy side, we don't interact much because inland aquaculture is all governed by states. So there's not a jurisdiction there for NOAA or the federal government for the most part, as even federal laws are delegated down to state authorities to implement, for the most part, not always. On the science side, that's where our real connective tissue is. Our research is system agnostic. So we do marine species. So if you're talking like tilapia, that's a USDA species because they do more of the freshwater work. But when it comes to marine species, we do research in-house that can then go into recirculating aquaculture or salt ponds or the marine environment. So all of that is sort of how we interact with the freshwater. Well, not fresh. You said freshwater, land aquaculture, but we really don't interact much with freshwater aquaculture.
Do you
Yeah, I'm
see,
trying to think.
so tying back our initial conversation about how we're including economic development, is
Mm-hmm.
that an opportunity for, is I guess, what's the purview of economic development? Is it going to be in the priority areas, or does it extend to the Iowa Economic Development Authority down the road, right? And is that potentially a connection to supporting and servicing inland aquaculture?
Great question. It depends upon which plan you're talking about. So the National Aquaculture Development Plan, 100%. All of it is for all types of aquaculture. When the Economic Development Agency is looking at aquaculture, they're not thinking about whether it's salty or freshwater, or about whether it's in the ocean, or whether it's on land. They're thinking about the communities that it's going to support. And that's what we needed, was that lens of sort of economic development authorities, interactions with those bodies. So at the national level, that national plan that is going to be coming out any day now, that absolutely is connected to every community in America, theoretically. The NOAA piece of the puzzle is really along the coast and the Great Lakes, focused on where we have assets compared to USDA also has extension agents and programs, and they focus more on freshwater and inland. So we sort of, as I'm talking, I think that I actually haven't said out loud, we coordinate with USDA constantly. We are both authorized by the same law. We have very similar authorities, and we work incredibly well together. So if there's ever any area where we overlap, we partner.
Mm-hmm.
Great. Double benefit to the nation. Not duplicate, but partner, where one agency will don't do one piece of the puzzle and another will do another piece of the puzzle. But for the most part, they do mostly freshwater and land-based, and we do mostly marine.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So hopefully I talked a lot about inland, and I think I caught most of the questions there, but if there's another question there, please drop it in the Q&A. I'm going to go to our friend John Corbin here asking, it says, great overview. What do you see as the site disposition vehicle to give a farmer permission to locate in federal waters, permit or lease, or something else?
Currently, the way to have authority to grow aquaculture in federal waters is through a suite of federal permits. You need an Army Corps of Engineers permit, you need an EPA permit, a Clean Water Act permit. So the first is Rivers and Harbors Act, the second is Clean Water Act, and then you need a number of consultations that the Fisheries Service runs many of those. And sometimes you need a Magnuson-Stevens Act permit. So the current infrastructure is a suite of permits that authorize the use of that marine space. There have been different pieces of legislation introduced that give different permit authorities, but I can't really comment on any of that suite of bills. Last year, there were 200, in this Congress, there have been 200 or 240 aquaculture bills introduced. So there's a conversation happening on the Hill for sure.
Would one of the resources be linked in the plan, the federal guide to permitting marine aquaculture in the United States? Is that the list of, yes, perfect. Yeah, I did my homework.
Yep.
Let's go to Anne here. Aside from continuing to grow and produce high quality soybeans, do you see that there is anything soybean farmers can do to assist in the expansion and acceptance of aquaculture operations in the future?
Yes.
Answer.
I think there
Please
are a
elaborate.
number of things that would be helpful coming from the soy community. One is help in telling the story of how US soy feed is different than other soy feed. That is a perennial challenge that we run into, is sort of the sustainability of feed overall. But that is a piece of the puzzle. Another is helping us navigate the importance of aquaculture, and this is coming from the Ocean Agency, is that when I talk about aquaculture, I'm talking about marine aquaculture, but I actually think the benefit to the nation is nationwide. We're feeding families nationwide, and all of the pieces in the supply chain come from our whole nation. So whether the farm is in Maine or in waters off of Texas, Iowa soy might be the feed, and sort of connecting aquaculture in and across the country is something that I think is needed to help advance the development in the U.S. The sort of great, what does it do for me mentality is
That's,
missing.
yeah, we struggle, and to build on that for Anne and for our audience, that's something SAA and the U.S. soy family is, trying to do around the world, right? Obviously, we're differentiating from other sources of origin. That's more important on a global scale, and we have a really great economic quality sustainability story to tell for U.S. soy there. But I do think it gets a little lost, right? In the U.S. of understanding that the farmers here are partners, and that we have, again, the same talking points that we share around the world in our sustainability story and our cost story is really powerful. But it gets lost to there's other ingredients. So I would say actually in some cases here, our competing ingredients aren't other sources of origin, it's other sources of protein. And so that's where we're trying to help make that an economic story and a sustainability story there as well. But I think we're all winning against the wild stock goals, and helping with harvesting protein from the ocean fish meal, but the other protein sources that we struggle to build that relationship. But it certainly is there from a research perspective and from a partnership perspective on behalf of US farmers. So great question. And as one other, is the interest in aquaculture from a national security perspective a fairly recent, or is that something federal agencies have some interest in for a longer time? If so, what did that intersection concern look like before the subcommittee you referenced?
Both is the answer. It depends upon what agency you're talking about. So it being a part of the conversation on national security, or recognize the importance of aquaculture in national security, has been known, and we've sort of like pounded the table about it from the aquaculture expert side of the government for a long time. It hasn't been heard until more recently. And I think that there are a few things that happened that changed that. One is the pandemic. For better or worse, and that on my slide, I had a picture of empty shelves in the grocery store. Empty grocery store shelves made people panic. I mean, you all remember, how many rolls of toilet paper did your family get, right? But that at a like government level was, how much food do we have to feed our people? If we can't get food imported, how are we going to make sure that we have enough nutrition to get through and make sure that people don't go hungry? And we saw a lot of chinks in our national armor. And that's when the DHS report started rolling out. That's when NSM 16, it's after all of that, that these sort of big markers and national security memoranda are a big deal. I like to think that my NOAA aquaculture strategic plan is a big deal, and it is, and we're moving the needle, but something like a national security memo saying we need more aquaculture is a game changer. And that's when like all the military emails started coming to my inbox. And so it has been a long build and a sort of light switch moment, I would say, around the pandemic.
It's just taking a step back. It's just interesting, right? That it's not easy, but relatively easy to write a memo and elevate its importance, but then to have the infrastructure in the back end to support the practicality is tough, right? And to do that quickly is tough. So I really empathize with you where you're at. And again, if there's ways that, because it is a really interesting talking point, right? Aquaculture is not only a seafood issue or in the soybean farmers world, a market opportunity, it's a national security issue. And so helping that take more, be more serious and help that be understood for everyone is one thing, but then, aligning the elevation of its importance by the White House to your work and our work and, all the great people in this webinar trying to actually do something about it. It's just a gap. So I think there's more conversations to be had for sure about how to bridge it.
Absolutely. I mean, it's a different, every year is different. The value that aquaculture brings to the table is elevating in importance every year.
Yeah.
The sort of like now, national security think tanks are reaching out because they want to engage in the aquaculture space. That it's a constantly evolving growth of support. And I think that's what's needed. It's not going to be, I don't think that we will truly affect change and get the type of growth that we need by aquaculture people saying we need more aquaculture. We need that bigger tent. We need to map it to larger national issues and have, a national security memo saying we need more aquaculture.
Absolutely. Well, this has been great. One final question, and maybe we'll wrap up, Danielle. So what's the best way for grassroots efforts like state aquaculture associations to interact with NOAA, both on coastal or inland states?
So that's a great question. There are a couple of different ways. One is pretty new. We have started supporting the State Marine Aquaculture Coordinators Network. So SMACN is our friendly word for it. And it started with a smaller suite of states and just went more national over the past year, I believe. So there should be a representative from each state who participates in that State Marine Aquaculture Coordinators Network. Again, that's on the marine side. For the rest of our engagements, you're always welcome to reach out to our team. I have a policy team, I have a science team, and an outreach and education team just within my office. Then there's the rest of the agency. And Sea Grant. That doesn't connect in every state, but it does get us more into the Midwest. If there are ways that NOAA is not supporting or that a gap in service right now that you think that is appropriate and in line with our sort of unique expertise, I am all ears. We just went around the country and did a suite of listening sessions as a part of a program review to better understand what our aquaculture community needs to see from our agency, how we're performing, what we do is highest priority, what's less of a priority, what should we do if we had more resources, this sort of thinking about what services we provide under different funding scenarios. And it was really helpful to help ground our program in making sure that we're doing the right thing. We are funded by taxpayer dollars. We are meant to serve the taxpayers. So that's my goal, certainly, is to have our program doing that. So if there's something that you would like to see us do, let me know. I'm all ears.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Danielle. As I mentioned in our first call, and it continues through today, I think there's just a lot of opportunity for SAA and NOAA to work more closely together. So I really appreciate you making time, and I've learned a ton. I have about 6 pages of notes here. So looking forward to the plans coming out and the program review being finalized and learning more about that. So want to extend the invitation back to you as well. If there's anything that the soybean industry can do, if we can, we're not necessarily a national security memo, but we can help, push if we need to, and certainly want to partner with our farmer dollars, right, and our farmer relationships and our great American soy. So I'll wrap up really quickly. So for those of you attending, I mentioned our quarterly research update. All of our projects and their status are included here. There's some really exciting things going on. So I do encourage you to download that and review it. The next report will be in October, and we have a few projects that'll be wrapping up their final reports. So those are the ones that are really valuable, and we do a better job promoting the final results. But if you're curious on what we're working on, that's the place to do it. And then just a heads up, I want to prime everyone to start thinking about our 2025 RFP. One of the things we didn't get to talk about and share here is we as a U.S. soy family are being intentional as well about our strategic plan in aquaculture. So over the next 6 to 12 months, we're going to be working on our strategic plan that complements NOAA's work and NOAA's strategic plan, what we need to do and where we need to be. So this will start to change. You'll start to see these in our 2025 RFP. And I wanted to just simplify it, really what we're looking for in the most near term is collaboration among farmer, feed supplier, and researcher. So traditionally, our projects have been in academia, which has been extremely productive and great. We have some novel feed ingredients and some smaller and up-and-coming soy feed ingredients, for example. But I think the projects that'll win this year in a tightening ag economy are going to be those that have a farmer involved, a feed supplier involved, and then the research or academia involved. So think about what that looks like and really how we drive demand for soybean meal and commercial application. Those are the biggest wins for us. And then, as I mentioned, we're going to have a strategic plan coming out, and hopefully Danielle and team will be a part of that as well. But I want to make sure that we're serving the needs of the aquaculture industry as well. And then, as always, if you ever have questions, please do write down my contact, give me a call, set up a meeting, send me a note, and I'll try to connect you with the right resource if it's not me, or if you have any questions, I'd be happy to do that. Admittedly, I'm running on about 3 hours of sleep right now with a newborn at home, so I'm not as sharp as usual, and I may be a little bit slow in responding for the next few weeks here, but I promise I will get back to you, and if not, just please nudge me again. But with that, we are right at our time here for an hour. And I want to just thank all of you for taking time out of your day for your interest in soy aquaculture and U.S. soy. And again, Danielle, thank you so much. This has been extremely informative for me, if anyone. So I'm glad that everyone else got to learn along, me playing catch up here. But thank you so much for making time and for all that NOAA does.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a good time.
All right, everyone, have a good day and take good care.